Welcome back, everyone. We continue with our conference, Islamophobia conference. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to thank Islamic Human Rights Commission, the Colonial International Network, and Scotland Against Criminalization Communities for their support of this conference. And this panel is creating Recapturing Islamic Ontologies for Understanding the Situation and Transformation. We have 5 very distinguished speakers, Imam Mohammad Al-Asi, Bilal Ware, Mohideen, Abdul Kader, Mohammad Nihad PV, and Ahmet Faruk Ünsal. Ahmet Faruk Ünsal expressed his apologies. His schedule was busy, because of some other commitments, and he couldn't make. But we have a very important and interesting discussions, and we'll start first with Imam Mohammad Al-Asi, who will deliver a speech around 20-25 minutes, and after him the others will respond to his speech. And Imam Mohammad Al-Asi, I'd like to first introduce him before he starts. He's a very well-known intellectual in the Western world, Western Muslim world. He's well known for his English tafsirs, the Ascendant Quran. It's the first English translation, or English language written in English Quranic tafsir, written in the West, in the US. He's based in Washington D.C. and this article that he's going to present has edited transcript of one of his Friday khutbahs delivered on 6 September 2013. Sorry, what is this? Are you going to speak about this article, or Imam Asi?
No, I have a presentation. I think
Okay.
I forwarded. Yeah.
I think it's just some wrong information included in your bio or your pack. So yes.
Yeah.
Floor is yours. You can speak 20-25 minutes. I'll time your
Okay.
Speech.
Okay. Thank you so much. First, greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I have to begin by thanking all of you for taking the time out, and especially the organizers for making this mental encounter at this time, critical time in which there are many developments all around the world and all inside of us in these 2 spheres. So I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who's involved in making this presentation possible. Let me begin by, I'm a stickler when it comes to using words. I've been in the world of words for probably the better majority years of my life. And I've listened to some of the presentations yesterday and today. I'm sorry I could not listen to all of them, and that had to do with time restrictions, but I have some comments that in as much as the organizers as persons and the organizers as institutes or associations, in as much as they are averse to colonialism and imperialism and the many manifestations of the abuse of power, still, in some way or the other, at least from my perspective, they are influenced. They don't want to be influenced, I grant them that, and it's very obvious, but they are still influenced by the opposite side, by those who not only use weapons of mass destruction to threaten civilization, but also use words of mass destruction to threaten the mindsets and the mentalities and the attitudes of people. Like the word Western civilization, who said this is a Western civilization? When we use this combination of words, Western and civilization, Western is a direction, it's geography, and civilization is whatever definition you want to give it. You can give it a historical definition, you can give it a contemporary one, you can give it a political one, you can give it an industrial one, however way you look at it. But when we are using the terminology of those who are using everything in their disposal against us, including the tools of words, then somehow we become part of them. And how can we become part of them in the negative sense? We are all part of each other in this world. But when you become part of something that you dislike, then how are you going to untangle yourself from it when you are beholden to its very roots of thought? Wouldn't it be, and I'm posing this question here, this is an introductory, I know the subject matter can go on for a long time, but I'm presenting this question to you. We are all rational human beings. We can think through these very calmly. Wouldn't it have been more accurate? And this is when ideas of, let's say, factual thoughts or thinking factually, this is when we run against the institutionalization of falsifications. Why don't we say Northern civilization? Why is everyone saying Western civilization? When we have the rudimentary geography in our minds, we are not, novices when it comes to the geography of the world. And where are all of these problems originating? Problems that we've been talking about, the areas we've been covering, are they originating in the West? If we look at the West geographically, when we say the West, I think what comes to a person's mind is all of the Americas, and then they put in with that Europe, and they call that the West. So is Latin America part of this Western imperialist structure in the world? Is it? Ask yourself. You can ask it and you can answer. I don't need to provide you with an answer to that. And so this is where, just at this very basic level, this is where we begin to trip on ourselves when we want to express ideas that are genuinely and in a healthy way opposed to the injustice and the oppression in the world. There are other terminologies that we have to sweep out of our language altogether. You see, when they own our minds, they meaning the other side that we are speaking about, Northern civilization, to coin a new designation here. When they own our minds, it becomes very easy for them to own everything else. They can own our lands, they can own our resources, they can own our destiny, or at least attempt to do all of that. And partially that is what is going on in today's real world. So let's, take a step back a little and begin to think about the phraseology we use so that we can begin in an original sense a healthy opposition to those who have been in charge of running the affairs of the world the way that they have. And this, it doesn't have to do with just a couple of words. There's a plethora of these phraseologies all over the place. The word Middle East is being used. Who said it's the Middle East? Where did that come from? When we look at this, it's a camouflage phrase that actually means the Muslim East. However, I mean, of course, we get into the nitty gritty of this, and there's the Near East, and there's the Far East, and there's a Middle East, and all. Where did all of this come from? They say the Middle East, it's the Muslim East. They say the Middle Ages, it's the Muslim Ages. Can we just invite ourselves to some original thinking here and purge our minds from imposed terminology on us so that we don't trail them and try to use the same tools that they are using to try to hope to combat their plots and plans. Reference was made to the Ottoman Empire. Oh, really? Can anyone point out to me an Ottoman emperor? The Ottomans had sultans. Can we just be as accurate as to say the Ottoman Sultanate instead of empire, and dragging it into the discourse and the developments of what is referred to, I'm using this so that, you know, communication becomes easier, what is referred to as Western civilization. And then even if we want to take this a little further, why can't we say Euro-American civilization? And here's another area that we have to give more thought to, and that is, when we speak about a civilization, what are we talking about? Because some people, they get confused between civilization and modernity. These are two words that somehow get confused in discussions and in debates and in presentations and all of this. So let us clear our minds on what we mean when we say civilization and what we mean when we say modernity. And so these are just a couple of a few comments about this whole subject that I would like us to step back a little before we, in a liberal way, begin to fall into the choices of words that actually work against us, like Islamophobia. You know, this is a word that, you know, some people juxtapose with anti-Semitism. You know, I don't know if I have the final word on this. I thought about it many times. A phobia seems to be something that you can't help but feel. You know, someone has a phobia of heights. Well, that person can't help it. I mean, if the person goes into an airplane or is standing on a precipice of a high-story building, or has a phobia, he can't help it. So, and there's this neurosis to the word, the fear of, but it's not a type of thought out fear. It's a type of, I can't do anything about it. I just have a phobia. So are we trying to say that these people who have this Islamophobia are somehow innocent? I mean, all of this is built into the word itself when we use it. If the discourse was ours, meaning we who are aware of the evils of this predominant world power structure that is raining miseries on the populations and the continents of the world, if we just had a real sense of the words that we are using, maybe we would rethink ourselves and be very cautious about using certain words to refer to certain realities. And within this sphere, within this area, we are encountering some type of mental difficulty in being free to express ourselves in a genuine way without using the tools of it's like, if we wanted to take it into the military sense, I'm going to buy my weapons from my enemies and I'm going to face my enemy using his weapons. Now that's easily understood. Wait a minute, I'm not going to get anywhere. How is my enemy going to afford me or sell me weapons that are going to destroy him? The same thing is going on in our mental sphere. We are using the tools of the enemy, their own tools, their own idiom to try to counter them. Well, it's not going to work. That's not the way things work. So, not to belabor the issue here, but this is very important, as we cover together from whichever point of view we originate. When we cover this subject or this topic, we have to be aware of the nuances that are built into the way we express ourselves. Good intentions are granted. No one is impugning anyone's motivations or intentions when we are tackling with this major issue of havoc that is spreading all around the world. Now, I'm sorry that this is an extended but a necessary introduction to what I have to say. And that is a paradigm shift from the pedestrian terminology that is being used, intellectual as it is, academic as the choices of words are, but there has to be some type of break with the way world affairs are being presented. A lot of these issues, whether all the way from what is called gender identity nowadays, all the way from that issue, that psychological or social issue, all the way up to the political and military issue of what is capturing the headlines of these people in power, which is the war in the Ukraine, and everything in between. All of these issues, when we take a look at it, have to do with power and authority. That is the major issue: power and authority. Power and authority, to whom do they belong? Do they belong to a king, to a chief executive, to a parliament, to a system of some sorts? To ask yourself, to whom does power and authority originally belong? The human crises, when it comes to philosophies and ideologies and what is called religions and theologies, the crisis here is in our own minds. We have not defined where power and authority belong. In our crass materialistic world, power and authority simply belong to those who have accumulated weapons, manufactured advanced weapons, and accumulated treasuries of wealth. That's power and authority belongs, as we are led to believe and as we take for granted, to those who have these means. And in all of this, there is no God. whether it is those who are secularly liberal or liberally secular, whether we are talking about religious people or are talking about atheists, whoever you speak to, it seems like everyone has succumbed to the fact that power and authority belong to today's, and this is another one of their words. I mean, sometimes I'm dragged into using their own terminology, but it's a matter of facilitating communication here, not a matter of acquiescing to their choice of words. Power and authority belongs to these quote unquote superpowers. And as I said, God is irrelevant. In the world that we are talking about, God is irrelevant. I'm using the word God also because we're speaking English here. My preference is to use the word Allah. But anyways, without getting on that subject, which can consume a lot more minutes here, God doesn't exist. And if he does exist, it's about for an hour a week. Someone will go to their place of reverence, whatever they may call that, and they will satisfy this little need in them of having some type of spiritual input, and that's it. And then life goes on with its wars, with its miseries, dislocations, injustice, poverty, ignorance. The world goes on and nothing's why? Because we have not, and I don't care what religion a person is, the word religion is also one of these traps, but once again, I'm facilitating communication here. I don't care what type of religion or ideology a person belongs to. In the final analysis, unless a person is a rational, thinking, practical, down-to-earth Muslim. That's the exception over here. And I don't say this out of any discrimination or out of any type of superiority or these other things that come with referring. I just happen to be a Muslim myself, but one who tries to ponder through the meanings of this heaven to earth communication. This heaven to earth communication no longer exists. So, even Muslims, I'm critical of those who speak for Islam or who ascend the platforms of Islam as public speakers, and all of them have their different designations, and they range from the religious scholar all the way to the teacher in the classroom who's teaching an Islamic course. All of these, it's hard for me to say this, but I think, a person, to be honest to their conscience and to be honest to their conclusions, they themselves cannot understand Islam in a practical, relevant way that resonates with the average person in the world. That's the crisis that we are living. What I mean by this, there's a big gap here between those who are supposed to be speaking for and about what God's communication to mankind is and the rest of the world. What I mean by this, I'm going to give an example so that we can understand what I'm saying. When a person in today's world, the communication in today's world is controlled. We have controlled information. When this communication and information occupies the public sphere and the public mind, when someone says terror, then implicitly Islam comes to mind. When someone says terrorist, implicitly a Muslim comes to mind. This is how the control of the impressions and the feelings and the thoughts of the world public generally is. The task ahead of us is, and I'm summarizing a lot of territory here, but the task ahead of us is, when someone says justice, then Islam comes to mind. When someone says a justice seeker, or a person who is determined to have social justice in the world, then a Muslim comes to mind. You see, both ends of this dichotomy. This is the task. This is the gap that we are living. And this is what has to be worked on, so that people, when someone says Islam, the first thing that comes to even a person who's familiar, even Muslims themselves, the first thing comes to mind, someone is praying 5 times a day, or someone is fasting Ramadan, or doing these personal and private obligations. But as far as the social, as far as the ideological, as far as the economic, as far as the interactivity among communities and societies and populations are concerned, then there's an absence here. What do you mean? What does Islam have to do with all of this? You got to be out of your mind. Do you think God cares for how we organize our affairs? There's a God up there. I mean, this is in a favorable scenario here. A person will tell you, who doesn't agree with what you're trying to say, he'll tell you, yeah, there's a God up there, but what does he have to do with organizing our world affairs? There's no communication from God about. Oh, yes, there is. Yes, there is. And this is the Quran that we are speaking about. This is where God Almighty outlines the course of action that humanity has to take to live in peace within itself, and to live in peace within a global family. Now, in my paper, I know I'm time sensitive here. It's running my clock out. I have a couple of minutes left, but in my paper here that I sort of wrote, just to present a couple of ideas, I refer to 2 dynamics that are included in heaven's communication to earth from the source of power and authority of mankind. And one of them has to do with the combination of wealth and power. Whenever there's a confluence and consolidation of wealth and power into an establishment, then that establishment is on its way down. It will collapse. And that's a heavenly promise. The ayah, the verse was quoted from Surah Al-Isra, وَإِذَا أَرَدْنَا أَن نُهْلِكَ قَرْيَةً أَمَّرْنَا مُتْرَفِيهَا, or أَمَرْنَا مُتْرَفِيهَا فَفَسَقُوا فِيهَا فَحَقَّ عَلَيْهَا الْقَوْلُ فَدَمَّرْنَاهَا تَدْمِيرًا. Look at the structures, the establishments of today's world. Where do you find a considerable, a noticeable, an unmistakable concentration of power and wealth? Wherever there is this unbridled concentration of power and wealth, that is the first indicator that that society is on its way out. That power structure is going to destroy itself. The second heavenly privilege of information that we have is in Surah Ar-Rahman, in which Allah is telling us that everything that He created with a proportionality and a balance. Everything, from our human bodies all the way up to the firmaments and the cosmos above. All of this has been created with a balance. and he tells us not to interfere in this balance. What is happening with this concentration of autocratic authority and destructive power, the concentration of that is destroying or is tampering with this divine balance in existence and in life. And there are people now who, just through the sciences themselves, the physical sciences, this is another area that I'd like to, I wish I had a little more time to speak about, but the physical sciences that humanity has reached is impressive. Thank you very much, humanity, and all the human societies in all of these ages contributed to this. There's not one society or one group of people that can claim that they are the ones who brought humanity to the degree of science that we have today. So our hats go off, so to speak, borrowing another expression from them. Our hats go off to the progress, discoveries, inventions, technologies of science. But when it comes to social sciences, that's a wreck. What is called the study of humanities is a wreck. There's nothing accomplished there. To the opposite, there's disaccomplishment. There is retreat and regression on that front. And so we're living in this type of dichotomy. But even though these scientists who are just out there looking at the facts and discovering new things, they are raising red flags. They're saying, wait a minute here, we are on a road to extinction because of what we have done to the environment, to nature, to the ecosystem. And well, Allah, God Almighty, has been telling you that. وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ, which means Allah has in his creation placed an equilibrium in existence. Don't tamper, don't mess around with that equilibrium. That's what we are doing. And so scientists are speaking about natural disasters that will happen. We're just beginning to see the hints and the beginnings of it in what is happening in the atmosphere and the climate of the world. And it's out of Allah's mercy that these scientists are speaking the language of prophets, because prophets of the centuries past, of the millennia that passed, were speaking about the same thing. Doom is about to happen if our own societies, if you continue down this course, you're going to bring down the whole way of living. Our life itself is going to be exterminated, not as individuals and communities. It's going to be exterminated as empires, as power structures, as societies and social orders that we've worked on for generations, and all of this is going to come to an end. So it's about time that humanity begins to discover its maker and its creator before it is too late. And many Muslims are not helping in this regard. Actually, many Muslims are an impediment for the rest of humanity to understand the precious information that somehow has become a possession of either a certain group of people. You know, if I'm going to use the exact words, I may be getting on some Muslims' nerves. I don't want to jeopardize my rationality with the emotionalism that can creep in if I begin to use certain words. But that's the fact of the matter. This is where we are in today's world. And I hope that someone, not as an individual, but as a concerted effort, will wake up and save this humanity. This is another issue right here. Now that I use the word humanity, see, as I said, I've been a wordsmith almost all of my life. When God refers, it's a simple thing that I want to bring to your attention, but it has a lot of meaning. When God refers to you and me, and he refers to what we call human beings or mankind, or however way you want to call it, whatever your preference of words is, he calls us social beings. Now, how accurate is that? When the word insan in the Quran is used, it refers to a social being in the singular, and it also refers to the social being in the plural, meaning as a group of people. A social being. Imagine if just in our language, instead of saying a human being, we say a social being. Now, there are socialists in this world who advance socialism as an economic or political or hybrid economic political theory. And never do they use the word a social being. But imagine in our grassroots makeup, if we were truly people of a Quranic culture, we would think of ourselves as social beings. And for those who want to build on that, they can go a little step forward and say socialist beings. But that's not used. Who's the Islamic thinker or who's the Islamic ideologue who has entrenched himself in the heavenly meanings that are communicated to us and just discovered this little reality? Wait a minute here. Let's stop and begin to use accurate words. Let's begin to say social beings. That's not going to happen, even if one or two scholars, individuals, professors, academics, whoever, discover that actually we should begin using that. It's not going to go far. It'll just stay in our limited capacity. I see that the moderator is appearing on the screen, so that's a good signal that I've run out of time. But I hope at least I've communicated something in the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Imam Al-Asi. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, because it's like you start with these very basic ideas, and then it appears that you're not going to say anything new. You'll repeat, the usual things, but then suddenly you pull out something, and it's very like deep and surprising. So it's like this idea of returning the basics. I think one of the issues is that we are facing, or we feel that we should come up with something groundbreaking, something like it will change the landscape of how we perceive the world. Like there's a new context, new aspect. But I think, as you rightly put it, that's not the issue. That shouldn't be the expectation, because human history doesn't change, human emotions, human behavior. So the idea of returning the basics and trying to unpack those basics and make a better sense of them, I think this is a very important approach. And also the critical, I enjoy reading like self-criticism, that you are not hesitating to speak out about those issues, the way that we are not understanding or perceiving things in the right manner. I think these are very important, and I believe that it's going to provoke some discussions here, excellent discussions we'll have from the respondents. And I like to move on to those respondents, and then I'll give you opportunity to engage with those respondents. Okay. Now I'd like to move on to Bilal Ware, who is a historian of Africa and Islam. He earned his PhD in 2004 at the University of Pennsylvania, where he trained in African history, African American history, Islamic intellectual history, Ware's research spans the last 1,000 years, centering on West Africa while reaching into the Mediterranean lands of Islam and the Atlantic worlds of the African diaspora. Ware investigates mainly with tools of an historian, but his approach is interdisciplinary. His research relies on conventional sources of Africanist historiography, archival and documentary work in European languages, and oral history in African languages. Yet his methods have been deeply shaped by the Arabic textualist tradition, anthropology, and philosophy. His work seeks to engage with the intervene in and push the edges of African and Islamic studies. Ware's teaching focuses on Islamic thought, anti-slavery movements in West Africa and the African diaspora, and broader intersection of race, religion, and revolutionary thought. He has published several articles on these interrelated themes, as well as a book, The Walking Quran, Islamic Education, Embodied Knowledge and History in West Africa. That's a fascinating research focus, and I'm very excited to listen to you today, Ware and Bilal, and the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa ta'ala barakatuhu. So I wanted to thank the organizers, the conveners, and apologize for my inability to attend previous sessions. Not only are many of them starting at 2 a.m. Local time here in California, but I've also had competing commitments. Glad to be able to join today. I wanted to also thank Imam Muhammad Al-Asi for this wonderful opening keynote for this panel. And I wanted to return to a couple of the central concerns that he raised in order to make my own particular contribution to the question. So the first thing to say is it's absolutely foundational that we return to our categories. As Muhammad Al-Asi, reminded us, we perceive life and engage through a series of inherited, internalized categories that are not necessarily going to be the most productive for the way that we think about a path forward, and for what the subject of this particular panel, creating/recapturing Islamic ontologies for understanding our current situation and transformation. So I'm going to focus a lot on understanding Islamic ontologies. And as my bio indicates, most of my understandings are formulated by African Muslim thinkers, African Muslim philosophers, and authors. So the first thing that I'll say, just to sort of offer an African-informed view of the overarching concept of the conference as a whole on Islamophobia, is to underline a point that Muhammad Al-Asi made, is that perhaps this is not the most useful or productive term that we could utilize, in addition to the allusions to neurosis that are present in the term in and of itself. I often begin conversations with predominantly non-Black Muslim audiences by reminding Muslims that in the main, Muslims don't have an Islamophobia problem. Muslims have a white supremacy problem. And that Islamophobia is just one subset of this broader problem of white supremacy, which plagues, of course, many societies around the world. There is a reason why our former president here in the United States of America could say, ban the Muslims and build a wall to block out the Mexicans in the same breath. Because for white supremacists, Muslims are simply, in the main, one more category of people of color. This is a racial, civilizational, categorical divide that has separated the West, quote unquote, self-imagined space from that of the worlds that they colonized. And this goes back to prior to colonization itself, to the way that the world was, framed by crusaders. All of these, kind of proto-white supremacist movements and ultimately white supremacist movements have constructed a particular kind of white, quote unquote white, quote unquote Western civilization, right? Because the people aren't white. That's a construct that comes into existence. The West also is a construct that is made. So the first thing that I would just say is that we should absolutely, if we're going to try to recapture Islamic ontologies, we should start to rethink and unthink some of these categories. And this also leads to greater capacity for solidarity with other movements and other struggles, which are similarly, braced against white supremacy, right? The great African-American Muslim scholar Elijah Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, when he diagnosed the fundamentals of the Palestinian situation, he understood it as a problem of white supremacy. Ashkenazi Jews being a European population that are displacing indigenous Arab inhabitants in their homeland. He understood it as a fundamental iteration of white supremacy itself. And when we think through our collective struggles as being part of a broader struggle against a particular kind of racialization, civilizational ideal, then this opens up not just possibilities for better understanding Islam, but for better understanding the capacity for shared solidarity in the struggle. And as Muhammad Al-Asi reminded us, that we should be evoking Islam when conversations about justice, when conversations about struggle emerge. The Quran is the most radical emancipatory document ever to enter into human history. It is a text that is designed to facilitate the internal and external liberation of human beings, to liberate human beings from the things that imprison them in their interior life. And we're going to talk about those categories in a moment, but also in the external world. When you study the Qisas al-Anbiya, the tales of the prophets that are in the Quran, the first thing that you'll notice with a sound reading of the Quran is that all of the prophets are on the forefront of struggling against the fundamental injustice of their time. We always find the people of God at the forefront of those struggles, because that, in point of fact, is what makes them the people of God. It is that service to that humanity, that insan, those social beings, as Muhammad Al-Asi reminded us, that qualifies human beings, or qualifies people as the people of God, the people of faith. We have accepted this category of religion as a private, internal affair that's part of a separation between a secular public sphere and a private religious one. But in point of fact, the moral and ethical call of the Quran itself points Muslims to the forefront of the social struggles against injustice in any and every age. So now let's talk about some of the ontological barriers to a sound understanding, and let's just go through the thing that first produces the trauma. I'm sure it's come up, repeatedly in the conference proceedings to this point, and that is the trauma of colonialism and the way that colonialism has radically transformed Muslim self-understandings, inherent in the tension in the title of today's panel, creating and or recapturing Islamic ontologies, right? Are we creating something new? Are we getting back to something we've lost? Well, what is it that we've lost, and how was it lost? You know, with a few debatable exceptions, the entirety of the Muslim world was colonized, subject to either direct colonization or to brutally imposed imperialism that caused us to, in many ways, depart from the basic ontological categories that animate and that animated Muslim thought throughout the centuries. I'll give a concrete example to make this clear. One of the terms that's already come up in today's panel that will frequently come up is that we need to think about our minds and change our mindset, reassess the way that we that our minds function. So when we strip down to the basic ontological categories that are present in the Quran and really in the early Islamic philosophical tradition, one concept that's notably absent is the concept of the mind. The word aql, often translated as intellect or mind from Arabic, in point of fact, never appears in the Quranic text in its nominal form at all. So if we are going to get back to or rediscover Islamic ontologies, let's start with the organ that we are going to use to understand in the first place. Aqala appears as a verb in the Quran many times. To understand, to think, intellection is the function that is named with this verbal form, but the nominal form, the form of the noun, aql, actually never appears in the Quranic text, because the thing that does the aqalaing, the thing that does the intellection, the understanding, the thinking and reflection in the Quran is not the mind at all. The thing that does that in the Quran is the heart. The heart appears as qalb or qulub 132 times in the Quranic text. The sadr or sudur, the breast or breastplate, the bosom which holds the heart, appears 44 times in the Quranic text. The fu'ad, or the ardent flame of the heart, appears 16 times in the Quranic text, which leaves us with close to 200 references to the heart in the Quran and not a single reference to the mind. And when I am teaching this material to my students at the University of California, Santa Barbara, previously at the University of Michigan, I say, well, the Quran says, Allah ya'lamu man khalaqa wa huwa latiful khabir. Would he not know, he who created it? And indeed, he is the subtle and the informed, the aware. And the reason why I point to this ayah in reflection upon this absence of a reference to the mind in the Quran and this focus on the heart is that while Western, quote unquote, or Northern social sciences and human sciences posit certain kinds of elements to the human being, if we are firmly rooted in a Quranic ontology, then we believe that God knows the contents of the human being because God made the human being. So if the mind were a real thing, God would have mentioned it in the Quran at least one time instead of 0 times, and mentioning 200 times almost this instrument of reflection, this instrument that brings together emotion and intellection, spiritual insight. All of this is concentrated in a single organ, which is the heart itself, which takes us to the kind of core fundamental contribution that I wanted to put into our conversation today. The great contemporary West African scholar, Imam Fode Drame, and if you haven't read Imam Fode Drame's works, he's also, Mufassir of Quran, brilliant scholar, trained in the West African Islamic scholarly tradition that I myself write about. He once said that every effort to make a fundamental intervention into the human condition will be compromised if we lack a sound understanding of what a human being is in the first place. The human being, from the standpoint of the Quran, is comprised of four principal components. This ruh, or spirit, uncreated divine breath that God breathed into the frame of our shared common human ancestor, Adam. And by the way, one of the principal problems that blocks our capacity for collective action as a Muslim community is that we still also have not solved the basic problem of anti-Black racism in our community. So we often ignore these brilliant Black Muslim scholars like Imam Drame. The reason why I'm making this point now is that another one of these great scholars from earlier years, Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba Mbake, when he talked about the problem of racism, he understood it as a subset of the broader Quranic sin of kibr or istikbar. He said, never forget that it was this that brought low the cursed Satan. We seek refuge in God from both of them. In other words, from Iblis and from istikbar, arrogance or cultural pride. He said, the cure is to contemplate your body and how it was created. You begin your life as a nasty drop of sperm. You live your life as a walking sack of feces, and you end your life as a corpse, odious and rotting. You are all the children of Adam, and it is from dirt that you were created. His point was to send us back to our original foundation in dirt and remind us that we are all black, red, white, brown, green, anything in between. We are all the children of Adam. We all come from this same ancestor. And one of the most profound arguments that the Quran makes is that we all come from a single source and will all return to a single source, this shared origin and common destiny of humanity. So in that creation of Adam, the breath is breathed in, this spirit, which the Quran never mentions as being something that's judged, it simply returns to the source. And when that spirit hits the physical body, this other core constituent part of the human being, a soul is brought into existence, a nafs, our anfus, plural. This is the part of the human being which is judged. This is the part of the human being which goes through judgment. Four principal components: the ruh, the nafs, the physical body, and the heart. Are we utilizing the categories that emerge organically from the Quran and from our own tradition, or are we using the categories of thought that our colonizers have imposed upon us? And I'll humbly submit to you that as long as we are using the categories of thought that our colonizers have imposed upon us, then we will be incapable of truly emancipatory interventions into our own history. And I'm going to close with this. And it's a story that was told by one of my principal mentors when I was an undergraduate student. He said, I was a young man at the time. He called me by the nickname that I grew up with as a child. It's also the nickname that you find on my Instagram account. So he called me Butch. Butch Ware is my Instagram, my only social media account. He said, Butch, do you know how they train elephants in the circus? And I said, I'm sure I don't know how they train elephants in the circus. He said, well, you have to whip them in order to keep them under control, because even a small baby bull elephant, if it should ever get loose, would trample over every thing and everyone in the circus and cause huge damage in a matter of seconds. So they whip them with heavy whips, and they attach heavy chains that are literally biting into the ankles of these magnificent animals, and they tether these heavy chains to pegs that are anchored heavily in the earth or in concrete. And anytime that baby bull tries to run, they whip them. They whip them. Just hearing about it, was sort of shocking. Then he continued. His name was Mahmoud Al-Kati, also a Muslim brother. He said, but once that elephant has been broken, it can grow to be a fully grown animal weighing several tons, and you can keep it in place with the sound of any insignificant lash. tether any insignificant rope around its ankle, tie that to any insignificant pole, and it will never run because it will remember all of the times that it tried to run in the past. And he said, do you know why I'm telling you this story? I said, I think so. I said, the elephant is us. We have been brutalized through experiences of colonization to the point that we have colonized ourselves. We have become the internal mechanism that keeps ourselves in place. And what I want to point to is that most of these constructs that keep us in place are intellectual constructs. They are the categories through which we think. One great West African author, Sheikh Hamidou Khan, the author of a book, Ambiguous Adventure, brilliant book that talks about the plight of the mentally colonized African Muslim. He says that the two principal weapons of the colonizer are the cannon and the school. If we like, we can think about this as cannons and cannons, right? Of military weapons, but also of literary and intellectual canons that form the way in which we think. And without returning to the internal categories that emerge from our sacred texts and from our sacred traditions, then we are still chained ourselves. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa ta'ala barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bilal Ware. And it was a very striking story. At the end, you really made it stick with us. I think this story will stay with me the whole panel, your talk. I think it was a very interesting response to Imam Al-Asi's keynote talk, because your approach is from the white supremacy and not only in the like again, Imam Al-Asi will correct me, Western civilization, or in the North America, and maybe in Europe as well, but also within the Muslim community. I think this is the one very important issue, and we are missing out this great wisdom and knowledge that we could get from the African community, and it's actually something that fulfills us as Muslims all around the world. Everything has to bring something different, and in that sense, we are missing out that very important contribution. And also, I think we keep criticizing. This is one thing I always notice myself. We criticizing West or North America, and then European civilization because of their mistreatment, but also we can do the same at will because of that accepting the norms and the worldviews is some kind of ingrained us, that kind of white supremacy. We feel we are not white, but we feel we are white, and then we think we can do it to the others. So in that sense, I think it's a very good contribution, and I am very much interested to hear Imam Al-Asi's response to your response. And now I'd like to move on to the next speaker. He's a veteran activist, Mohideen Abdul Kader. He studied law in London and has been a legal practice since 1970. He's a barrister at law, Gray's Inn, and a member of the Malaysian bar. He has been actively involved in public interest issues. He has participated in campaigns for the unconditional release of political detainees and the abolition of laws that provide detention without trial, the prevention of the export of pollution from the developed countries to the south, and for the stopping of destruction of tropical rainforests. He has campaigned locally and internationally to give effect to the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people and to stop the violation of their human rights. He is now the president of Consumers Association of Penang and board member of This World Network and Citizens International. Brother Mohideen Abdul Kader, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank IHRC and the other organizations that, which have organized this important conference. And the theme is interesting, is the sun setting on the Western Empire. I will believe that the sun is setting, but the question is, what do we do when the sun sets? I found Imam Asi's paper very interesting, and especially his comments earlier on about terminology. I know we are used to using terminology very loosely because of the way we have been educated. In a sense, we have been, in a language, subverted to thinking in the colonized manner. And maybe it is time that serious attention is given to this fact. And scholars like Imam Asi will help to prepare maybe something like a dictionary where terms which the colonial education has created can be substituted with something original, something embedded in your own culture and religion. That will be very useful. I found Imam Asi's, I read the whole paper, it's very interesting, and his account of civilizations that had been destroyed as narrated in the Quran because of the civilizations failing to live according to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and creating injustice in the world and to other creation. He makes an interesting observation that now, currently, we are at the crossroads. What is the crossroads? Which road do we take? Do we take the road that is being pursued by the secular, I won't say Western civilization, Northern civilization, or Anglo-European civilization, which places emphasis on individualism, materialism, greed, and the exploitation of nature and exploitation of fellow human beings? Are we going to continue taking this road, or is there any other alternative? The road taken by the Northern civilization has spawned several crises, which each threatening the very survival of that civilization. In fact, threatening the survival of humanity itself. For example, there is gross injustice in the world. While a small group of people are wallowing in enormous wealth, millions and billions of people are suffering poverty, hunger, and disease all over the world, and particularly in the southern continent. Now, this is a very unjust world. It is a product of the economic and social system that this civilization is produced, and it cannot sustain. Even scholars in the West in the North have admitted it cannot sustain. There has to be transformation or change. Similarly, there is such erosion of moral values. Sexual perversion is promoted, and in fact, it is the foreign policy of many northern governments to force other developing countries to adopt their values and to promote this sexual perversion. The breakdown of marriages, there is no more marriage, there is partnership, and there's no, religion has become irrelevant in their lives. And the most serious problem today, crisis arising out of this system, is the climate crisis. I think recently they had a conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, called the COP27, and the Secretary General of the United Nations warned the world in his speech that we are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate change irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. This is a warning coming from the chief official of the United Nations. So there is a urgent need to change directions. We cannot pursue this road anymore. I think Imam has pointed out in his paper, The Way Out. We have to go back religion to Islam, which teaches human beings to live in accordance with, in harmony with nature. Just now, the reference was made to, Imam made reference to the balance in nature. We have upset this balance, ruptured this balance through our activities. For example, we have destroyed our forests, poisoned our rivers and seas, and as I said, temperature, it is increasing temperature, which is killing the basic life in oceans, which produces the oxygen for us. So human action, human activities is bringing us to the brink of disaster, and we have to change. And Islam provides the solution. I think in Surah Al-Rum, verse 341, Allah says, since they have become oblivious of God, they have forgotten God, corruption has appeared on land and in the sea as an outcome of what man's hands have wrought. And so we will let them taste the evils, some of their doing, so that they will return to the right path. And we are experiencing it now. We are experiencing a very extreme weathers that never happened in the history of human civilization. We are experiencing the disappearance of thousands of species on Earth. We are experiencing drought on one side and floods on the other side. These are just warnings to us given by Allah. If we do not listen, if we do not take heed of warnings, we will be facing total disaster. As the Secretary General has said, we are like on a speeding train approaching a cliff, and soon we'll go over the cliff and crash unless we take very drastic steps to change our way of life, to respect Allah's commandments and help our fellow human beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Mohideen, for excellent timekeeping. This is a very interesting contribution again. I think what amazes me with Brother Mohideen's work is that he's doing everything else, all these activism and against anti-Muslim hatred and everything else, but also he's fighting for the environment and fighting for inequality. So, and it's also reminding us that, okay, we are, always discussing the issues concerning about the Muslims and so on and so forth, but there's a bigger picture. There's a humanity that if you don't look after the environment that we live in because of selfishness and greed, of course, it comes down to this idea of colonialism and the greed, the unbridled greed, and this insatiable human desire, which is self-destructive. And in that sense, Brother Mohideen's contribution is very important, and it reminds us that there are other important aspects to this this injustice, the world that we live in. It's such an unjust place that it's not just oppressing the weak and the individuals who are not able to defend themselves, but also the environment. It's powerless. So thank you very much, and I hope that Imam Al-Asi will further elaborate and open up a difficult conversation, more conversation about it. And our next speaker is Mohammad Nihad. Mohammad Nihad is a master's student at sociology at University of Hyderabad. He works part-time as a journalist, and I like to welcome him if he's available. Yes, he's here. Thank you, Mohammad, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I hope my voice is audible for all.
It's very well, thank you. Everything is perfect.
Okay, sure. So first of all, I thank IHRC for giving me this opportunity to engage with a good panel, which is engaging with a topic or a title which is worth analyzing and worth observing with a keen lens, I think. Because when I listened to the lecture and read the essay written by Imam Al-Asi, I found certain observations and certain engagements that he tries to make in his lecture or essay quite striking. When we come to the point of terminologies, the use of terminologies and the issues that we are facing regarding the terminologies and the categories that we use, let me point out an interesting observation once made by Wittgenstein, an Austrian philosopher. When he talks about the concept of grammar, he says that when the grammar is typically understood as a set of rules which talks about the proper syntactic and semantic usage of languages, he says that the grammar is not just about the syntactic use of the language, but in his hands it becomes a wider notion. He says that the grammar represents the core of the language, and also it becomes a unique rule-governed activity. That is, when it comes to the way how grammar works, he says that it offers a standard for determining if the language choices are correct or incorrect. It makes judgments. And the grammatical notions and the norms, they are not just claims or not just suggestions. He says that they are more like commands and authoritative impositions. I think the language games that Wittgenstein is referring to, which is very much analogous to the everyday dynamics of our articulations and our expressions in the political sphere. because in every social setting we find a dominant grammar which imposes the notion of what makes sense. That is, if we use a certain word, the dominant grammar in the certain social setting decides that whether our articulation or whether our expression is making sense or not. In that sense, I think the language itself becomes more like a form of life. It's not just about an uttering. It's not just about the words we use. It becomes much more wider. So the paradigm shift that Imam Al-Asi was referring to, I don't think it will emerge out of the shift that we try to make in the usages or the categories that we use of sort of include in our discourses. More than that, I think we must engage with the terminologies in a more deeper way. He talked about the word Islamophobia. When we talk about the term Islamophobia, the category that we use, I think it should not limit ourselves in acknowledging the mechanisms that alienate Muslims or persecute Muslims or sort of demonize Muslims. But on the other hand, we should also be aware of the scope that these terms hold when it comes to engulfing our field or plane of praxis. Because many times we find this tendency to get indulged or involved, involved in discussions and discourses related to these terms. We sort of make ourselves, or we sort of push ourselves away from a praxis that sort of replies or sort of provides an alternative to the situation that we are facing. It's not just about acknowledging the or sort of analyzing or observing the mechanisms that produces hate or sort of produces actions that put us in a situation where our lives becomes miserable. Rather than that, I think we must let not the discourses and the discussions that that involves our terms engulf our plane of praxis. So here, I think we must engage with these questions in a more deeper way. And when Imam Al-Asi talked about a wonderful example that he tried to bring, he said that when one thinks about justice, Islam should come to his mind. And when a person is thinking about a justice seeker, an image of Muslim must come to the mind. So I think to reach such a stage, I don't think merely trying to formulate new categories or terminologies would help us. Rather than that, I think creating ontologies must involve the act of going back to the epistemic roots of Islam, I think. Because even when persons that claim to be, a person of faith, or the groups that claim to be faith-based, we find a sort of gap, that the great scholar Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, often used to refer to, the gap between tasdeeq and a'mal. He says he, in a harsh language, criticizes those who try to create a gap between tasdeeq, which is verification of the faith internally. So those people who try to create a gap between the verification of faith internally and the performance of rightful actions according to the faith. So here, faith, the seat of faith, like Dr. Bilal was referring to, is heart. So when heart becomes the seat of faith, we must engage in actions, and we must formulate a praxis which is connected to our faith, and that faith itself is a product of revealed knowledge. So the epistemic roots that we have, and the epistemic roots that should make us stand firm amid all sort of disparities and inconsistencies, that should be protected. So here, the gap between the verification of faith internally and the performance of rightful actions, or the right choice of actions, I would like to say, because the Quran always uses the superlative degree of actions, right? So in the political praxis, it should be about the best choice or the right choice that we should make. Because when it comes to our reactions of certain situations and certain questions, what we find is we react on terms of what the particular attack is, rather than building a whole structure, an entire structure which stops the further attack on other aspects of our life. I think we should, rather than focusing on reacting a certain aspect of what is being attacked, we should think of building an entire structure or a mechanism that should prevent further attacks. For example, when we talk about the attacks on Muslims in different parts of the world, especially in India, where I belong to, the problem always is like, even as I've said, people who resist the attacks on Muslims. I'm talking about the Muslims. Yeah, here talking about creating Islamic ontologies, right? So, I think the Muslims must be very much responsible in that regard. So, the Muslims, when they react or resist to such mechanisms or such moves that put their life in trouble, I think it should not just be limited in asserting our identity as being Muslim. Many a times we find this tendency to assert the identity as something self-agential. But I think being a Muslim is the moment where we enter to an identity which is not at all self-agential. We submit our agency to the command of Allah, the divine command, and as I've said, we have epistemic roots which is based in the revealed knowledge. So our attempts to put or place ourselves in the ambit of identity politics could be quite detrimental, in the sense that when we proclaim that our identity is self-agential, we only pinpoint, or when we only emphasize on the aspect of identity being attacked, rather than thinking about reformulating, or rather than thinking about creating a structure or a mechanism that should defend everything that comes from different parts. Because I think when we talk about creating Islamic ontologies, it becomes important to think about something which is wholesome and which is in its entirety. So that's one thing that I wanted to add, and also one more thing that I wanted to add to the discussion is about the terms of solidarity. When it comes to the terms of solidarity, many times the terms to which we agree sort of create an imbalance. It's not just the power imbalance is not just between the oppressor and the oppressed. I find the imbalance among the people who present themselves as sympathizers and people who are in solidarity with us. So our act of solidarity, our act of sharing spaces must not be in a way that compromise this balance, because once we compromise on terms that end the entire way of being a Muslim, or the meaning of being a Muslim, it doesn't make any sense anymore. So that's what I wanted to add. I think the discussion would move further.
Thank you very much, Mohammad Nihad. It was a very interesting contribution. You talked about the Islamic ontology and solidarity, but I think most importantly, the need for or the importance of closing the gap between the conviction and the action. So these are, I think, very important contributions to Imam Asi's speech. And now I think we can have a joint, like everybody can appear and then we can have a conversation. But I'd like to give the floor to Muhammad Al-Asi first. And if he wants to respond to his respondents, and then we can take some questions. But even if you don't have questions, then we can have a conversation and have free discussion. Thank you. Yes, Muhammad Asi, Imam Asi.
Yes, alhamdulillah. I have a few comments that I would like to add to the conversation or the back and forth that has been going on. There's an ayah in the Quran in Surah Al-Hujurat that says, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. This ayah gives the following general meaning. We have, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has created us from a male and a female, and has rendered us, as the Quranic words are, shu'uban wa qaba'il. Nations and tribes. This is once again the inability to think through the profound meanings of the ayah and the choice of words by Allah Azza wa Jal in this ayah. Shu'ub means derivatives of each other. As peoples in this world, with the different configurations that we may have, whether we look at it as ethnic or racial or however way we want to classify our differences in this world, we are extractions of each other. Shu'uban wa qaba'il, we are correspondents of each other. Now, in the English language, of course, I have a translation, the Ascendant Quran translation. This is besides the tafsir, the translation itself. I've tried to work this original meaning out as best I could, as it would, as we would phrase it in English. But I just explained to you right now, shu'uban wa qaba'il. And then Allah says, لِتَعَارَفُوا. This is an important contribution. Understanding this ayah is an important contribution to the subject matter or the general discussion that we are in. So Allah is saying, so that we may mutually come to understand each other, so that we may together, so that it becomes possible for us to understand each other when we are together. لِتَعَارَفُوا. That means, taking this a step forward, this would mean I cannot understand you if you cannot understand me. And I'm not talking about you as an individual or me as an individual. I'm talking about whoever is classifying themselves as one chunk of humanity as opposed to another chunk of humanity, another group, another aggregate of humanity. However way you want to fit that in your mind. because we have a preponderant body of information. The media, the mainstream media, fuels this, in which, you know, race has become a defining, a very important defining element in the interaction of societies and countries and nation states, etc., etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is breaking down all of these barriers. Look at the world, 100 or close to 200 nation states. Now, this quote unquote nation state, 200 of them, where did this come from? How did all of this happen? The ayat in the Quran go on and on to break down these. أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Another ayah says, have they not gone throughout the world? Have they not traveled and traversed the world? أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. There can't be any barriers in the world. So where did all this come from? Once again, it's the dislocation, the disidentification of where power and authority belong. When that happens, all of these other issues begin to haunt and to depress our social lives. When we, pick up the choice of words of the quote unquote predominant culture in the world, we use, especially because the world is more or less more influenced by those who are racist in their ideologies or in their constitutions or whatever. We say white supremacy, a word that everyone is using. White supremacy. Has anyone ever asked themselves, because juxtaposed with white, oh, he's a white person. Juxtaposed with that is either the other person is colored, or the other person is black. Now, whichever way you look at this, let's say you're looking at it as one person is white, the other person is black. Now, in the usage of the language, I think Muhammad Ali Clay made some references to this in a very humorous manner, but in a very a substantial way. Why is it that everything that has to do with sort of virtue and goodness is white? When you use that word in the language, white something, it has to be good. The angels are white, for example. The advanced person in the world is white. You look at Christ's images, he's white, etc., etc. And then when you come to the word black, then everything ominous or everything evil or something like that, in those negative terms, is associated with the word black.
Even there's white lies. Yes, there
you go. Just think internally of all of these things, and then when someone says, okay, that's white and black, and then someone says white and colored, well, you mean to tell me white is not a color? White, and then you have colored. So what are you indicating? White is not a color. It is. What is it then? It is light. It is divinity. It is excluded from being a color. This is what I'm trying to say. Please, brothers and sisters, whoever's tuned in, think before you use the words that those who wish you no good are using. Let us be a little more careful with the usage of these. The word Semite. And another example. they say anti-Semites. So what are we supposed to understand here when they say the word Semite or anti-Semite? It's another word for the word that cannot be expressed because everything is going to break loose. Hell is going to break loose. The J word. That's the Semite. And so if you are anti the J word, then you are an anti. Where did this come from? Where did this definition of Semite come from? It came once again from the racist mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because Semites, Semitics or Semites, it's a group of people who shared a commonality of basics of language. And the blocks, to put it simply, without going into history and the details there, the Arab bloc, the Amharic bloc of people, and the Hebrew bloc of people. How come Arabs and Amharic people are excluded? They're not Semites, as far as you and I can tell. The only Semites that exist are those who begin with that J word. That's you see, we have been controlled inside of us. This is where the danger is. On that level, when they control this process in this area, brother spoke about aql and yaqilun and fu'ad and sadr. In addition to aql in the Quran, there's fikr and there is fiqh. And both of my brother is right. Aql does not exist in the Quran as a noun. It exists as a verb. And the fu'ad and sadr and qalb in the Quran exist as nouns but don't exist as verbs. And so the word yaqilun, this word means to discipline your thoughts. Because we have to, in the Quran, we can't lump a lot of words together and give them one word in the English language. No, they are placed there because there are nuances. There are fine distinctions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to communicate to us, which it should be inviting our thinking capacity and capability to give this more thought and begin to make the information and the ayat of the Quran relevant to our lives instead of us. So, one of the speakers yesterday mentioned a peace movement in the world, which is quite admirable from my point of view, to have something called a peace movement in the world. But it's so ambitious that I think would not be possible as a beginning. As a beginning, I think there should be an acquaintance movement in the world. لِتَعَارَفُوا. If we can begin with an acquaintance movement in the world, where there's this, coming together of the different configurations of the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented us in the life that we are living, this will begin to break down the barriers of class consciousness, of race consciousness, of sectarian consciousness, all of these divisive types. And the description goes on and on. Whichever issue is possible to divide humanity, that is being worked on by the powers that be. So if we can just begin to think, this is the first step here. It's in our minds. Begin to think of probably agreeing with yourself that it is possible to put together an acquaintance movement.
Imam, may I jump in on this point?
Yeah, sure.
Well, so yeah, so two references come to my heart. The first was from a MC Search, from a white rapper from the 1980s, where he said, "Black cat is bad. A black cat is bad luck. The bad guy wears black. Must have been a white guy that started all that." That was that was the line that came to mind. And then the second was with reference to the ayah that you cited from Surah Hujurat. This is the tafsir of Shaykh al-Islam Ibrahim Yas. Dear brother Mohammad Nihad, when you said Shaykh al-Islam, I was expecting, you to say Ibrahim Yas, the great West African scholar, alhamdulillah, because he was also known by this title. So in his tafsir of the ayahs that you mentioned, Imam Muhammad, he said that the meaning, the implicit meaning, not the connotation, not the denotation, that you know one another, is that you would love one another. And it's the same connotation that is present in the Hadith Qudsi. He says that God was a hidden treasure, so he made the world that he would be known. He made the world that he might be loved. Right? So that he draws this homology between the two. And then he goes a step further and he says, how can a people that hates itself love others? And this goes to the fundamental, statement that Muhammad Ali was making, that El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X was making, and that even our brother Mohammad Nihad was making earlier today, because at the core of our reflexive defenses of identity is a profoundly internalized insecurity, self-hatred, and feeling of lack and deficiency. And that as long as we remain in a state of ignorance about ourselves, then we will continue to project, sort of hatred, deficiency, reactive defenses of identity, and so forth. The philosophically and linguistically, right? To borrow from a European philosopher in this case. And by the way, any useful, wisdom is the lost found patrimony of the believer, right? So we take useful truth from wherever it comes, but we graft it onto our ontological framework rather than borrowing that of others. So what Sartre says is that the antithesis, both linguistically and philosophically, must contain the thesis within it. As long as we are in a position constantly of responding to the colonizer, then we have ingested whole the poison that we have been given, and all we do is transmute it and give it back. We invert the categories of their thought, but we never start with just our own internal ontological categories and absorb from a place of sort of conscious, mature, self-confident reflection. The nature of what God is trying to communicate to us about human difference and so forth. So those were the two references, one from a great West African scholar and the other from a white MC.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wants to contribute?
Yeah, I wanted to add something to what Dr. Bilal was talking about. When he talked about translating the word لِتَعَارَفُوا, to love or to create love among yourselves. I think the word ma'rifa, when we link it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we often refer to it as a way towards mahabba to Allah. So when ma'rifa is created, we reach a state where mahabba is also created. Also, the second thing that I wanted to point out is a concept which was elaborated by the great scholar Malik bin Nabi. Malik bin Nabi, when he was referring to the defense of Muslims and the ways Muslims were trying to resist the colonialism, he talks about a fallacy. He says that when Muslims were actively trying to resist colonialism, simultaneously they were being victimized or subjected to a tendency which he named as colonizability. Like, we are fighting the colonizer on certain terms, but we are prone to a tendency which he calls as colonizability. That is, we face certain situations and fight against it. We encounter certain predicaments, we respond to it, but we don't have a solid platform or a solid field where there is no active intention to not get colonized again. Once we fight the colonialism, and when it appears in a different form, we are rendering ourselves colonizable. So he talks about colonizability. So I think we should engage with this tendency as well. It's not
Thank you.
because we are talking here about ontologies, and the sort of way the title is formulated, it's also interesting. It's not just talking about an Islamic ontology, rather than it's talking about Islamic ontologies. It makes me remind of the verse from Surah Al-Ankabut. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that what was that, the final verse of the Surah Ankabut? I'm not able to recall it.
Are you looking it up, or?
Yeah, just give me a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. He says that وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, if you make an initiation, if you try to strive in the path of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. He will guide us to paths. Rather than mentioning a single path, he talks about paths. So I think the epistemic roots that we share as common among ourselves will give us or guide us to varied understandings, which is very much contextual to our specific situations and specific predicaments. So I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us go through it and enlighten our path with the divine guidance.
Thank you very much. Brother Mohideen Abdul Kader, do you want to say something? Otherwise, I'll wrap it up and we'll conclude the panel. Okay. I can't hear you. You are muted.
Enough has been said.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much again. I really enjoyed this panel. It was a very interesting conversations we had, and I liked especially the idea of acquaintance movements. If I ever start a movement in the future, I'll definitely name my movement. And I think it's a very deep and profound, this idea of knowing, in the sense that it's just all these enmities, most of hatred, enmity is rooted with this idea of not knowing and fearing what is unknown. And so it is something that we should maybe work on and try to know each other and the others as well. And in that sense, it's very important. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in the last panel of this conference. And now I'd like to invite IHRC Chairman Masoud Shajarev to give a vote of thanks after the panel. Okay, we are waiting for Masoud, and we can wait, I think, a little bit. I think, yes, he's here. I was gonna talk a little bit. Yes, Masoud, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm really delighted to be with you after such a fantastic organized program. The Islamophobia conference have been sort of one of the jewels that we have been able to present to the community. And now it's 9 years since the start of these programs, and it's the 9th year. And I'm really delighted that it was really was organized in this way, presented in this way, and it really opens up a lot of an avenue for discussion, not just at the time of the conference, but indeed in days and weeks and months following the program. And this is why it's been organized in this way, to be a catalyst for moving forward and actually analyzing what is taking place, and indeed what is the solution and what should be the response of all of us as Muslims, or indeed as people from other community. I'd really like to thank everyone who has helped to make these few days happen. Our cooperation from sort of other communities like Deen organization, and also from Scotland, and also many individuals. I've got a list here. I want to go through it. Kaniz, Abid, Suleiman, Amjad, Fatima, Dawood, and all those behind the scene who have done tremendous work to actually make this happen. Work of Muhammad Hamza, who designed the poster, all of you who watched it, and the cooperation of Dr. Seyfeddin Kara and Dr. Saeed Khan, and also the work that every year Arzu Mirali has put into this. I'm sure I have actually left some people out. All those who made the presentation, what a fantastic, diverse sort of presentation. I would like to thank every one of you. I would also like to thank all of you who attended these live, despite the fact that there were football games happening most of the times, and you actually chose to watch this live. And indeed, I'd like to thank all of you who have watched it since the live program. I actually was looking at the figures, and it's really rapidly increasing. I would like to ask all of you to make sure that those people in your community, among your friends and colleagues who you think will benefit from watching this and listening to it, please encourage them to do so. But above everything else, I like to say that really, without us getting together and find solution and being part of the solution to this ever-increasing demonization of Muslims, which is leading to demonization of others, and we are not going to be moving forward. We need to work together. We need to work together as Muslims. We need to work together as other communities, and we owe it to the humanity to actually stop this level of demonization on its track and challenge the governments, those institutions like media and others who are pumping this hatred day in, day out, because they haven't got solution to the problems of the society. So why not divert the attention to hating others? Again, from bottom of my heart, I thank every one of you, every single one of you, all the contributors and everyone involved. God bless you. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.